Rare photos show different side of Marilyn Monroe. Like most public personalities, the image that Hollywood and her professional portfolio paint of Marilyn Monroe is a beautiful woman who's also incredibly confident about both her beauty and girlish appeal. She was trained to be an actor and proved to be a seductive tease even in her first appearance as an extra in a tragic film. Since she was an actor, she understood how to use innocent charm, but at the same time had real insecurities due to an imperfect life as a woman. The evidence tells the tale. The early background of an icon of an era. Putting forward a very important truth first, Marilyn was actually born a brunette. She had her hair dyed blonde during her career as an actress to take advantage of the stereotype as a blonde, as well as her ability to act out the role of naively innocent and emotionally impressionable young woman. Since blondes are striking and were stereotyped, even in the 1950s, she profited epically from her makeover. It's suitable that Marilyn Monroe was a brunette. Girls with blonde hair seem ordinary, earthy, humble, and a bit fragile. This would actually be appropriate for her inner character because she was prone to both paranoid fear and fine anxieties about everything that could impact her life. A girl who cares is in touch with her meek side, possibly an asset in her acting career. It doesn't change the fact that she suffered and had a depth that only her era could provide. The girl did experience the full blast of the Great Depression as a child. She was actually born in 1926, meaning that she was a child throughout the Depression period and would have witnessed it from a vulnerable angle. It might have strengthened her, but she also saw how fragile and uncertain life could be. It surrounded her, and she was 19 years old in 1945 when she began her acting career. Marilyn had the advantage and disadvantage of a mother who began working in the fringes of the film industry in the 1920s. As her mother, Gladys, had a stable job and the benefit of a foster family, Marilyn's early childhood was not unhappy. For better or worse, Marilyn was raised by a single mother who had gone through one affair and 2 unpleasant marriages. On one hand, her mother had a stable job and a home. On the other hand, the abuse from her early first marriage might have lingered in her mind as painful scars. Marilyn grew up without a father other than a temporary foster family. She would have learned about life from her mother's point of view and would have learned about her angst as she would not have been gagged from the presence of a husband. There's no evidence that Marilyn was awkward and ignorant about men. Her mother worked in a city and there were always plenty of men around for influence. The lack of supportive father might have colored Marilyn's views about femininity, and it definitely lent to her assertive attitude. In the 1930s, Marilyn's mother bought a house with funds from her job and allowed a few actors to pay for residence as a source of supplemental income. It becomes possible to see how much influence she received directly from people in the entertainment business from an early age. These actors were closer to the action than her mother, but were also of humbler means than prime celebrities. They also had a daughter, so Marilyn did enjoy the company of someone like a sister. The extra income from the lodgers was important because Marilyn's mother had a nervous breakdown at this point. Whatever the root cause of her deteriorating mental health, Gladys was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and spent much of the rest of her life in a mental health institution. As Marilyn was no longer receiving her mother's care and income, she became a protected child, and it was a friend and not a relative, Grace Goddard, who ended up in charge of her mother's estate. What this means is that Marilyn Monroe lost her mother at the age of 8 and had to live with a strange family in her mother's newly purchased property for about 16 months. Some people believe she might have been molested at this time. Although the wife of George Atkinson was present, it could have been that she had to adapt to a difficult family and became submissive and withdrawn at this point in time. She developed a stutter and meek habit as a reflection of her difficult living conditions. She was rescued by Grace Goddard, who had her live in her own home for a while. This was temporary, as Marilyn eventually found herself in a Los Angeles orphanage. The institution was highly rated, but she did have to adjust to quite a few peers from down and out circumstances. This experience might have made her wiser and even opened her up, but she was subject to the stress of many female peers as boarding mates. The influences that made a shy girl into an assertive woman and ultimately a gifted actress are undoubtedly many. But among the most prominent was her love of the grandeur that film presented to her. She was a lost girl and wanted to be someone important, and the career of acting presented this possibility to her. On top of this, Marilyn was an avid reader and apparently introspective due to her hours of solitude. As early as junior high school, she excelled as a writer, but did not seem excellent in other subjects. Whatever pain haunted Marilyn, she did not become mentally ill as her mother did, but instead had a practical and sound mindset and found solution to her renewed problems, which hit her as early as her high school years. Her informal stewards, the Goddards, were no longer able to house her because they had moved to get a new job. Marilyn was sent back to the orphanage, but didn't want to stay there and ended up marrying a factory worker as an escape. Her career begins dealing with boredom. Her marriage was not happy, and so Marilyn did not spend her entire life as a housewife. Mostly, she complained of the boredom of being a housewife, since she was mostly living alone and her husband would have been tired after work. To deal with the domestic unhappiness, her first husband, James Doherty, ended up enlisting in the Merchant Marines, which meant that he had a good job but wasn't present with his wife most of the time. In fact, he spent an entire 2 years away due to a shipping career that involved the Pacific during the Second World War period. Marilyn found herself alone and ended up moving in with James's relatives. She got a job at a munitions factory and contributed to the war effort with her own 2 hands. She began having photographs taken of her at this time, first with her posing with her work equipment and then as a postcard model. Quite the adventure-seeking and brazen young lady, she signed a contract with the Blue Book Model Agency while her husband was away. Her early career was met with disinclination by most potential customers and critics. She was considered attractive enough to pose as a pinup model, but she was denied more high-profile opportunities because she seemed too much like a country girl and not a serious model. She did what she could to defy the stereotype and proved to be a hard-working newcomer. She dyed and straightened her hair and took her wardrobe seriously. She was rewarded with the success of appearing on 33 magazine covers by 1946. Marilyn used pseudonyms to help her advance her career and possibly to separate her work life from her domestic life. Her self-selected early name was Jean Norman, and while it might have sounded a bit more stylish to herself, it was inevitably an industry professional who gave her the professional name of Marilyn Monroe. The first name mimics another star that was already famous, and the last name comes from her mother's maiden name. This is obviously the catchy name that became iconic. Marilyn was not an instant success in spite of her enthusiasm. She had not gotten over her remaining girly habits right away, but it could be her lack of training in class that made her undesirable, except for short stints at first. She was given a 6-month contract, mostly to keep her out of competitors' hands. She was taught the skills of an actress and entertainer, a general skill set that made her flexible for different roles. At the start of this new life, her husband protested because she was getting involved in something that entirely competed with her married life. Since Marilyn Monroe was more dedicated to her new job than to her husband and strongly believed in her potential to succeed, she divorced James to make room for hard work and limelight. She didn't have any children yet at this point and had already been effectively separated for 2 years. Success and breakdown as career woman. She did not immediately receive breakthrough success, but continued to study as an actress and made contacts with various means. She supported herself financially by serving as a pinup model. The second acting school she attended did observe her abilities, and while she was growing quite a bit, their personal opinion was that she was still too shy and insecure for the career that she wanted. The irony is that she was able to refine these very qualities into one of the keys of her sex appeal. One of her early breaks was meeting an executive of Fox and effectively seducing him. Through a combination of guile and personal service, she secured an opportunity with Columbia Pictures through a personal recommendation of the Fox representative. This little scenario reveals her growing determination and personality, and of course she worked with another studio to avoid an obvious connection with the Fox executive. Columbia Pictures did a lot to refine her style and look. Her hair was dyed a lighter shade of blonde to make her seem truly star-like. She was given a makeover to resemble Rita Hayworth, and she began working with one of the most important acting coaches in the studio, Natasha Litmus. Her first serious role was in Ladies of the Chorus, but this was not a financial success. Newly dubbed Marilyn Monroe turned again to using her sex appeal to advance her career. Since her contract with Paramount Pictures was over, she was willing to model nude in order to enter higher profile work. As this period showed her goods and didn't make her seem tasteless, it did much to raise her profile within the industry. She eventually met Johnny Hyde, and through him received increasingly higher profile roles. Given her professional nature and determined personality when focused, her career eventually became successful. She was named the Personality of the Year by 1952 and was even seeing Joe DiMaggio to a great deal of publicity. Marilyn was iconic by the mid-50s. She'd starred in a whirlwind of different roles and had adapted to quite a few different personas with surprising success. Her classical appearance and determined attitude made her very appealing. Her first serious hang-up was with drug addiction. She used alcohol, amphetamines, and barbiturates to deal with the psychological effects of a whirlwind career. This was industry standard, to give actors drugs in order to help them cope with difficult standards. These drugs did not improve her acting, and she became severely addicted by 1956. Marilyn went on to marry Joe DiMaggio and continued to have a film career that lasted until her death at the age of 33. She was a shooting star in the industry. Her sex appeal increasingly exploited and refined as her career progressed. Her personal troubles and deteriorating personality led to the intrigue that cost her life. She apparently committed suicide through a drug overdose and made a phone call prior to her death. Since the circumstances are still uncertain, she might be seen as the victim of the stresses and predatory nature, as well as the lax morality of Hollywood.